Before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I thought that it was normal to just forget to eat, right? So I'd be getting in bed at 10 p.m. and think, oh my fuck, why does my stomach hurt so bad? And I would realize that the entirety of the day I consumed a Baby Bell and like a single grape. Apparently, normal people don't do that. Welcome to the Busy Bee with ADHD podcast, a podcast about tools and strategies for ADHD, all while laughing at my very dumb but plump ass, Haley Honeyman. I'm an ADHD coach and influencer with the goal of helping my fellow ADHD pals. Let's get into it. So today we're taking on one of the most asked questions I get. And I mean, genuinely, I hear this question pretty much every single day, which is it okay to self-diagnose? Now, it is so important that we start this by recognizing that this is a podcast based on my opinion. That's for you. And this is the fun of this shit show podcast. It's opinion-based, which means that I might be wrong sometimes, and I'm allowed to accept, and I'm happy to accept that I'm going to be wrong at some points in my life. But I'm going to make sure to present my ideas as opinions. But if I ever do reference something that I found online from like a study, I will reference it. So it doesn't sound like I'm just pulling random shit out of my ass. As much as I love to pull random shit out of my ass, I will try my best to give context. But just for fun, here's a random fact with no context at all. Australia is wider than the moon. I don't know why I know that, but I do. Okay, so when I was originally told that there was a possibility I had ADHD, I was 22 years old. I had heard of ADHD, of course. Generally, my concept of ADHD was like the, hyperactive boy at the back of the class that couldn't sit still. But at this time, when I was 22 years old, my TikTok had started to diagnose me already, but I hadn't really considered it as an option yet because, of course, in my mind, I wasn't an option of having it. So I was in my regularly scheduled therapy session because, trauma, when my therapist suggested that she thought that I might have ADHD and that seeking a diagnosis might be helpful for me. So I definitely spiraled a bit from here. I looked into ADHD pretty much nonstop. I mean, this could be the solution to everything, right? Of course, I'm going to focus on it. So almost all the content I was consuming online became ADHD related because I was so intrigued. And then eventually, I went to my doctor and he advised me that the wait list was so fucking long. And I mean, so dumb fucking long, over a year long. And I went, okay, what is my alternative? And he was like, that's not my problem. And I went, okay, bye. And eventually, I actually got an option, which was going the private route, which sounds really fancy, I know, but does it also scream extremely expensive? Because yes, it was. I ended up paying a shit ton of money to be told what I really already knew at that point, which was that I had ADHD. But my diagnosis was super weird. They told me that I needed to do a full brain scan and other tests to get the official diagnosis and the papers that go along with it. And at the time, I was so broke that I had to say, no thanks. And then I left. So really, while my diagnosis was expensive, it was quick, but I didn't even really get the official diagnosis because they wanted me to pay more to get the papers. So that was fucked. But anyways, this really shaped my opinion around the diagnosis process, right? Because of course, opinions are largely based on personal experiences, and my personal experience with the diagnosis process was really annoying and frustrating. If I could go back to that time, I probably wouldn't have gone through the company that I did, and I would have spent more time getting a diagnosis because I really rushed into it and was looking for just the quickest option. Am I glad that I got an official diagnosis? Yeah, I am. Do I feel that it was necessary for me? Yeah, I actually do. But do I feel that it's necessary for everyone? Absolutely not. My diagnosis helped me because it gave me peace of mind. I always wanted the option to take medication, which ended up being a shit show and got me addicted to pills, but that is not important right now and definitely another story. But why do I think a diagnosis isn't necessary for everyone? Well, Simply put, not everyone has access to a diagnosis. I think it's actually a privilege in today's world to have access to a medical process that provides clarity. A lot of places in the world are so behind when it comes to medical practices regarding mental health and disorders. And should these people be denied access to tools and strategies just because they don't have a piece of paper confirming their struggles? I don't personally think so. I hear quite often that young kids don't have access to a diagnosis because of the stigma around it and the fear that their parents won't let them, or worse yet, their parents actually won't let them because they, quote, don't believe in ADHD, which, oh, that is so sad and it breaks my heart. When I get DMs from kids asking what to do because they have uneducated parents that are really stupid and I hate them, but besides the point, but they're choosing to deny their children access to help, I remind them that you don't need a diagnosis to start treating yourself better. For the people in the back, you don't need a diagnosis to start treating yourself better. Now, I know that that's simplistic, and it can definitely minimize the challenges around a diagnosis or lack thereof. But the important thing to note is that we know more about ADHD than ever before. I mean, obviously, because it's, now, but in 2 years, we'll know more. But anyways, that means so much of the tools and strategies that you need are already available to you online. You just need to look for them. And I know that that's exhausting, and I know that that's hard. But here we go. Again, easier said than done. A lot of the time, ADHD folks struggle with task initiation or motivation, right? Which I'll give reference to in a moment. But why is this important? If you're deeply struggling with your symptoms of ADHD and can't find the motivation to build tools or learn tools, how will you ever start this journey on your own? First, let's start with education, right? I think this is at the forefront of learning how to suit your ADHD needs, regardless of whether you have a diagnosis or not. The more you understand why you're struggling with something, the better you'll be at combating it. So back to motivation. Thomas E. Brown, PhD, very fancy, says that the inconsistency in motivation and performance is the most puzzling aspect of ADHD. It seems like the child or adult with the disorder who can show strong motivation and focus very well for some tasks should be able to do it, for the same, for most other tasks that they recognize as important. It appears as if this is a simple problem of lacking, quote, willpower. If you can do it for this, why can't you do the same for that or that, which are even more important? However, ADHD is not a matter of willpower. It is a problem with the dynamics of the chemistry of the brain. Oh, Mr. Brown, that validation makes me feel incredibly horny. I'm joking. Well, no, I'm joking. Well, he also says the most basic factor contributing to the ability of a person with ADHD to focus very well and efficiently utilize their executive functions on some tasks while being chronically unable to focus adequately on most other tasks is a problem of neural transmission. For many years, it has been recognized that individuals with ADHD tend to chronically have insufficient release and reloading of the transmitter dopamine at synaptic junctions of neurons in the network that manage executive functions. So why is this important to understand when we're talking about diagnosing ourselves? Well, firstly, if you're struggling to do research on ADHD or learn more about it, that may be an issue of dopamine and not an issue of not caring. I've had clients who I've worked with in coaching who had never even heard of dopamine and how it interacts with ADHD, which if you know ADHD at all, dopamine is the key most part, in my opinion. But they still took the steps to get information through me, coaching with me, and they were seeking answers. They are proving that they care and want to learn strategies and tools in coaching. And it actually ended up being the tool that they needed to learn more about ADHD. Researching online wasn't the best option for them, but talking to somebody that has ADHD and went through the experience with them was the tool that they needed. And you, right now, you're listening to this podcast because you want to learn more. You're seeking information, and that is amazing. You need to celebrate that. Learning about ADHD can be hard. It can be exhausting, and especially without the ease of mind of a diagnosis, it can be really confusing. So let's talk about some of the things I would suggest doing to get started on becoming well-informed self-diagnosed. And the well-informed part is fucking important, because if you watch TikToks and relate to them and then diagnose yourself, you're doing yourself a disservice and the ADHD community a disservice by not understanding what a true diagnosis means. So let's start there. What is required to be diagnosed with ADHD? For this question, we're going to look at the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for ADHD. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. I know, long name and hard to remember, but there have been many additions to this manual, and the wording of ADHD has been changed as recently as 2013 to include adults in the diagnostic possibility. 2013, that's crazy. That's less than 10 years ago. What? Mind-blowing. So, the first section is the inattentive type diagnostic criteria. And I want to note that I personally think that everyone with ADHD has both, quote, types of ADHD. The presentation might just lean more one way or the other, depending on external or internal factors. Some people say that they're only inattentive or they're only hyperactive. And I personally, again, my opinion, don't believe that that's the case, but I'm not a friggin' doctor, so you don't have to listen to me. Here's what's included as the inattentive type diagnosis criteria. 1, displays poor listening skills. 2, loses and or misplaces items needed to complete activities or tasks. 3, sidetracked by external or unimportant stimuli. 4, forgets daily activities. 5, diminished attention span. 6, lacks ability to complete schoolwork and other assignments or to follow instructions. 7, avoids or is disinclined to begin homework or activities requiring concentration. And 8, fails to focus on details and or makes the thoughtless mistakes in schoolwork or assignments. So you might be asking yourself, do I need to display every single symptom to be diagnosed as ADHD? Well, this diagnostic process does depend on where you are and who you're seeing. According to the CDC, only 5 symptoms need to be present for an official diagnosis for, children or an adult. The CHAD organization, like SAW, dude, Chad, but double D, or better known as the Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is the leading nonprofit organization serving people with ADHD. And they quoted medical professionals saying, quote, "A diagnosis of ADHD is determined by the clinician based on the number and severity of the symptoms, the duration of the symptoms, and the degree to which these symptoms cause impairment in various areas of life, such as home, school, or work, with friends or relatives, or in other activities. It is possible to meet diagnostic criteria for ADHD without any symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity. The clinician must further determine if these symptoms are caused by other conditions or are influenced by coexisting conditions." So I know it's not necessarily helpful, but the answer to the question, do I need to display every single symptom to be diagnosed as ADHD, is simply, it depends, which sucks, but it does. Now on to the next section of the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria, the hyperactive impulsive type diagnosis criteria. These include 1, squirms when seated or fidgets with feet/hands. 2, marked restlessness that is difficult to control. 3, appears to be driven by a, quote, motor or is often, quote, on the go. 4, lacks an ability to play and engage in leisure activities in a quiet manner. 5, incapable of staying seated in class. 6, overly talkative. And the impulsive symptoms include 7, difficulty waiting turn, and 8, interrupts or intrudes into conversations and activities of others. I think when reviewing these symptoms, it's important to note that individually, these symptoms can feel relatively normal, right? Like I'm sure everybody at some point in their life has felt antsy and squirmed in their seat or has interrupted somebody before, right? When we're self-assessing though, we want to consider to what degree do we do these things? Is it occasional, infrequent, never at all? Or do you do these things all the time? Do these symptoms impede on your quality of life or put you at a disadvantage in any way? Now, there are 3 key requirements for ADHD that are often overlooked by folks that choose to or only have the option of self-assessing and self-diagnosing. And so these include 1, that the symptoms present prior to the age of 12 years old. 2, that the symptoms are not better accounted for by a different psychiatric disorder. Example, like a mood disorder or anxiety disorder, and they do not occur exclusively during a psychotic disorder. Example, like schizophrenia. And then 3, symptoms are not exclusively a manifestation of oppositional behavior. So why is this important? Well, firstly, ADHD is a disorder that presents in childhood and it doesn't go away. It is also not a disorder that you can suddenly get out of the blue, and that's based on research that we know right now. I know it's easy to be influenced by things online. That's often the reason I gain new vocal stems that I hate so deeply, like saying the word sus or swag, still at the age of 24, and I hate it a lot. The internet has destroyed my brain. But the point being that seeing symptoms online and mimicking them is not unheard of. So we need to consider if they've always been present or have an external motivation, such as, unconsciously mimicking things. But it's also important to note that when we decide to label ourselves as ADHD without a formal diagnosis, a key step we're missing is finding out if it is something else. ADHD symptoms are similar to a lot of disorders, and that means it's really difficult to fully understand what it is we are truly struggling with. ADHD is also, it has a high comorbidity rate with other mental disorders, and that, simply means that if you do have ADHD, the likelihood that you have another mental disorder is a lot higher than the average person. So when you're labeling yourself as ADHD, take that with a grain of salt and keep your mind open to the possibility that it could be something else. And my main suggestion is, if you do have access to a doctor, get a recommendation or hear what they would suggest. Don't come in with a massive list of reasons that you think you have ADHD. Instead, go in with an open mind and allow your doctor to do their job. And I know that that's hard because it's easy to be distrustful of doctors nowadays, but if you feel as though you're not being listened to, try a different doctor or option. I know that this sounds time consuming, but at the end of the day, if you have access to medical professionals, utilize them. That's what they're there for. But if you don't have access to medical professionals or a formal diagnostic process, this is a great place to start right here with me. Hi. I'm going to be talking every week about new tools and strategies that you can start implementing in your life, from an ADHD coach with ADHD to the listener who needs it. So as a reminder, if nobody has told you today, I am really proud of you for showing up, and especially for putting in the work on yourself. That's a hard first step, and you're choosing to do it, which is amazing. Now, each episode of the podcast, I want to take a moment to answer some questions that you might have. So today, we're answering a question from Melissa from Kentucky. Melissa asks, I was diagnosed at 42 years old, only 6 months ago. I'm finding my symptoms are worse than ever, and I can't help but beat myself up. Is there a reason for this? Firstly, thank you, Melissa, for sending your question. I really appreciate it. And if you want to have your question answered, simply DM me, but make the first line say, podcast question. That way I can save it. But in this case, I hear this a lot of the time, and I've come up with a term for it. Again, opinion-based. I call it post-diagnosis burnout. You've been living in survival mode your entire life, struggling to meet expectations and mask the real you, right? Coming out of survival mode is fucking exhausting. That's so hard to do. On top of that, you're now having to mourn the version of yourself that might have existed if you had access to your diagnosis and helpful tools and strategies earlier in life. That shit is messy and fucking tiring, okay? I felt the same way when I got my diagnosis, and I can tell you that it does get easier. What's required of you right now is not necessarily anything, but it may just be rest. You deserve the opportunity to give yourself time to heal from this past trauma. And when you're ready, you can face your diagnosis head on by finding tools and strategies. And it's pretty fucking amazing that you are where you are now and that you finally have some answers. That's so exciting. So thank you, Melissa, for the question. And I can't wait to answer more next time. But that's everything for today's episode. And a reminder, follow me on socials where I will post much more frequently and you can keep up to date with the chaos that is my life. And as always, I love you so much, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!